We're going to take a look at autonomic pathways in this lecture. With the anatomy of the autonomic nervous system, there's two motor neurons to go from the central nervous system to the effector organs. So we have the preganglionic neuron, which is myelinated, and then the postganglionic neuron, which is not myelinated. They synapse in the autonomic ganglia, which is located outside of the central nervous system. And remember that in the peripheral nervous system, a ganglion is just a collection of neuron cell bodies. So the preganglionic neuron is going to be located in the brainstem or the spinal cord, and then the postganglionic neuron is going to synapse with the effector organ. This picture shows the two autonomic neurons. We've got the preganglionic neuron cell body starting in the central nervous system, whether that's the brainstem or the spinal cord, and then it will travel out into the peripheral nervous system where it will synapse with the postganglionic neuron in the autonomic ganglion, and then the postganglionic neuron will synapse with the effector organ, so whether that's the cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, a gland, or adipose tissue. And then this picture on the bottom, I just wanted to show you that the preganglionic neuron is myelinated, so you can see that myelin sheath there. And then the postganglionic neuron is not myelinated. And then the other thing to point out is that notice that it takes two autonomic neurons to get to the effector organ. But in the somatic nervous system, which is going to go from the spinal cord here. So if we take our lower motor neuron and then go out to our skeletal muscle, and this one would be myelinated. So this lower motor neuron, let's say somatic motor neuron, we only have one to go from the spinal cord out to the skeletal muscle, and that's really different from the autonomic nervous system because you've got two autonomic motor neurons to go from the spinal cord out to whatever your effector target organ is. So that's really different between the somatic motor nervous system. We've got one lower motor neuron out to the skeletal muscle from the spinal cord, and then from the autonomic nervous system, it's going to take two autonomic motor neurons to get out to the target organ. So that's pretty different. Let's take a look at the anatomy of the sympathetic nervous system first. The preganglionic neuron is going to start in the lateral horn of the thoracolumbar spinal cord. So that would be important to remember. So just remember, sympathetic preganglionic neuron is going to originate in the thoracolumbar spinal cord. And then it can follow three different pathways, so this would be important to remember. So the most common pathway is that it will travel out of the central nervous system and then synapse with the postganglionic neuron in the sympathetic chain, which is just right next to the spinal cord. And the second pathway is that it can travel out and then synapse in the adrenal medulla. And then the third pathway is that the preganglionic neuron will synapse in the collateral ganglia. Here's a picture showing the three pathways that sympathetic neurons can travel. So we've got the sympathetic neurons in red in this picture. So we've got, notice the thoracolumbar spinal cord here is colored red. That's where the cell body of the preganglionic neuron is going to start. And then it's going to travel out, and here's the sympathetic chain. And this is out in the peripheral nervous system. It's just right outside the spinal cord. And it doesn't show it in this picture, but there would be another sympathetic chain on the other side as well. And so the most common pathway is this preganglionic neuron would stop here in the sympathetic chain, synapse with the postganglionic neuron, and then the postganglionic neuron would then travel and synapse with the target organ. So maybe it's going to the heart, for example. The second pathway is the preganglionic neuron will come out and pass through the sympathetic chain and just keep on going, and then synapse in the adrenal medulla with some modified postganglionic cells there. And then the third pathway is the preganglionic neuron will pass through the sympathetic chain and then synapse with the postganglionic neuron in the collateral ganglia. So these collateral ganglia, there's 3 of them on one side, and then there'd be another 3 collateral ganglia on the other side, and these are located in the abdomen. And these postganglionic neuron would then innervate the abdominal organs. In this picture of the spinal cord, I just wanted to show you the lateral gray horn, which is where the cell body of the preganglionic autonomic neuron is located. And then in the ventral gray horn of the spinal cord, this is where the somatic lower motor neuron is located. That's going to go out and innervate the skeletal muscle. So everything has their location, their place in the gray matter of the spinal cord as well. So lateral gray horn is where the cell body of the preganglionic autonomic neurons are located, and then the ventral gray horn is where the somatic motor neuron cell bodies are located. This is just a summary of the 3 sympathetic pathways. Remember, the most common pathway would be the preganglionic neuron synapsing in this sympathetic chain with the postganglionic neuron, which will then go and synapse with the effector organ. And then the second pathway we have is the preganglionic neuron synapsing in the adrenal medulla with some modified postganglionic cells, which will then release some hormones into the blood. And then the third pathway is the preganglionic neuron will then synapse with the postganglionic neuron in the collateral ganglia, which are in the abdomen. All right, so just a little bit closer look at the most common pathway. We've got the preganglionic neuron is going to be synapsing in the sympathetic chain, which is right next to the spinal cord. So the preganglionic neuron is going to be short. And so I've drawn a picture of this short preganglionic neuron, and it's myelinated. That's my myelin sheath there. And then it's going to synapse in the sympathetic chain with this postganglionic neuron, and then the postganglionic neuron is going to be long because it's got a long way to travel to wherever the effector organ is. So whether that's cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, a gland, or adipose. Okay, and then this is all written here, but let's just take a look at a picture. All right, so here we've got in light blue, we've got the preganglionic sympathetic neuron. Cell body is located in the lateral horn of the spinal cord, and it's going to come out through the ventral root and then join the spinal nerve, and then it's going to take a little detour here and exit the spinal nerve through what's called the white ramus. And the word ramus means branch. And it's white because remember the preganglionic neuron is myelinated and the myelin sheath appears white. And then it's going to synapse here with the postganglionic neuron in this sympathetic chain. So the sympathetic chain is just running right outside the spinal cord, and this is part of the peripheral nervous system. And then the postganglionic neuron will then come out here and go back towards the spinal nerve through this gray ramus, And the gray ramus is gray in color because the postganglionic neuron is not myelinated. So it looks gray in color, and then it joins the spinal nerve and then will travel towards the effector organ and then synapse with the effector organ. The other thing that's not shown in this picture that we'll just kind of draw in is this preganglionic neuron has some collateral axons that will travel up and down the sympathetic chain and will actually synapse with several different postganglionic neurons. So we can actually have some divergence going on, and we can spread the signal out, and that way we can actually have our signal going out to several different postganglionic neurons, and then they can synapse with different target organs. So that'll spread the sympathetic signal out to different target organs. All right, our second pathway, this is where the preganglionic neuron will just keep going through that sympathetic chain. It doesn't stop to synapse there, and actually will travel all the way to the adrenal gland, and will synapse with some modified postganglionic cells in the adrenal medulla, which, remember, the adrenal medulla is the middle of the adrenal gland. And it'll stimulate those modified postganglionic cells in the adrenal medulla to release some catecholamines. So remember that these are amines. They're made from amino acids. And the adrenal medulla is going to be releasing mostly epinephrine or adrenaline. And it also releases some norepinephrine and a tiny amount of dopamine. And so it's going to be dumping these into the blood as hormones. And so are these going to have localized or widespread effects? So hopefully you said that these effects of these hormones being released from the adrenal medulla are going to be widespread, because the blood is going to take these hormones all over the body. And that's another reason why the sympathetic nervous system has such widespread effects, is because these hormones are released from the adrenal medulla, so they go all over the body. Okay, and then this just shows the adrenal gland, which, remember, that's located right on top of the kidneys. You have two adrenal glands, and the adrenal cortex is on the outside that secretes some steroid hormones, and then the adrenal medulla is on the inside. And you can see the sympathetic preganglionic neuron coming into the adrenal medulla will synapse with some modified postganglionic cells there and stimulate them to release the catecholamine hormones, and it will release mostly epinephrine, a little bit of norepinephrine, and a tiny amount of dopamine. And then that will go into the bloodstream and have some widespread effects. Okay, and then our last pathway with the sympathetic nervous system would be the preganglionic neuron will travel through the sympathetic chain, keep going, and then synapse in the collateral ganglia, and then the postganglionic neurons will then innervate the abdominal organs. And here's just a picture of this. So just showing the preganglionic neuron cell body and the thoracolumbar spinal cord. They just travel right through the sympathetic chain, and then they're going to synapse here in these collateral ganglia, which are located in the abdominal cavity. So there's 3 of them here, and there will be 3 on the other side of the spinal cord as well. And then the postganglionic neuron would then innervate the one of the abdominal organs. All right, the parasympathetic nervous system, the anatomy there is a little bit different. The preganglionic neurons are going to originate in the brainstem and the sacral spinal cord. So important to remember that parasympathetic we're going to call cranial sacral because of where the preganglionic neurons start. And these preganglionic neurons are going to travel in the cranial and pelvic nerves. And the preganglionic neurons are going to be long. And so here's our picture down here of the long preganglionic neuron that's myelinated. There's my myelin sheath there. And then the postganglionic neuron is going to be short, and it will synapse with the target organ. So whether that's cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, or glands. The parasympathetic nervous system does not innervate adipose tissue because it's rest and digest, and it's not going to be telling you to break down your energy stores, so it doesn't innervate adipose at all. All right, and here's a picture of the parasympathetic nervous system in blue. So you can see preganglionic neurons will originate either in the brainstem or in the sacral spinal cord, and the preganglionic neurons will travel in the cranial nerves or the pelvic nerves, and they will travel to just about to the target organ. They will synapse with the postganglionic neuron there. So you can see the preganglionic neurons are going to be very long, and then the postganglionic neuron is going to be very short, and it will synapse with the target organ. Okay, and this just shows the parasympathetic pathways. So preganglionic neuron will start either in the brainstem or the sacral spinal cord, travel in the cranial nerve or the pelvic nerve, and these preganglionic neurons will be long, and then the postganglionic neurons will be short, and they will synapse with the effector organs.